All right. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jamal Walker, and you are tuning in to the Love Heart Project. And the Love Heart Project is an idea that I had to interview white allies of Black and brown skinned people to, excuse me, to give voice to the love that they have and shared desire to be connected with Black and brown skinned people. And to really speak out against racism, white supremacy in a way that reflects their heart and not just our thinking, people's thinking. So, also, it's my hope that through these interviews that I'll be posting on various social media sites and platforms, that that it'll demonstrate that through outward and purposeful expressions of love and a deep desire to have connection with Black and brown skinned people, that the love vibration will become so strong that any refusal to connect with its frequency will become too painful for the heart to bear. And with that, I am very pleased to welcome in another friend of mine, Reverend Rafe Ellis. Rafe, how you doing, brother?
I'm great. How about you, Jamal?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for joining us today. All right, so before we get into the body of our discussion here and our interview, uh, tell me a little bit about your background. Who is Rafe Ellis?
I am a licensed minister in Centers for Spiritual Living, which is the practice. It's actually an inclusive practice under the title of Science of Mind, but it's really a study of all faith traditions that pulls together the common thread of love. That we are all created out of one substance, one source, to be that substance and source in form. And so we are all inseparably connected as one in individualized form. And I'm so honored and privileged to do that for a living. As before I was a minister, I have a pretty eclectic background. I was raised in the only white family, literally in a black ghetto in Leesburg, Virginia. There was the county courthouse, a whorehouse, our house, and the rest of the hood. So I was a childhood heroin addict. I was addicted to heroin at the age of 7, an IV heroin addict by the age of 9. By the grace of God, I now have 37 years clean and sober, or I wouldn't be talking to you. Pretty sure I'd be dead. Um, I was a criminal, then I was the cop. I was born in the body of a female, so I am a female to male transgender man, and I am fortunate to be married to an amazing black woman. So I understand right from the gate that I come with a very different perspective than the average white person, and do the best I can to use that as a gift instead of a weapon. And sometimes I fall short.
Wow, very diverse background. Thank you so much for sharing that with all of us. So tell me briefly, what is your connection with me?
I met you. I became aware of you when I first took the position as the senior minister for Sierra Center for Spiritual Living in Grass Valley, and was learning about the area and the Love Walk, and that was the second Love Walk. And so Deborah and I, my wife, attended that and experienced you from the stage, and then followed the trail to CCBB and got connected with you through that.
All right, wonderful. And for those of you who don't know, CCBB is an organization that I helped to co-found with my friend Bill Drake. And it's the full title is Creating Communities Beyond Bias. And that's a group that we have here locally where we work with other organizations within the county to help to educate people about racism, prejudice, bias, and ways to unlearn that and giving people tools to be able to be better allies for people of all backgrounds, whether it be racial or along sexual orientation lines or what have you. So that's what he's referring to. And Love Walk, of course, was something that we organized real grassroots like when my son was the victim of some heavy duty racial taunting and that sort of thing. And we got the community to rally around that and to take some responsibility for being more aware of what happens to people of color up here in this mostly white county, and being willing to stand up and step forward to assist when issues of racial injustice are happening. So that's an ongoing project as well. All right. So what made you decide, Rafe, to take part in my Love Heart project?
Because I have a voice and I am committed. My bottom line commitment is to use every breath in my body to dismantle supremacy in every form until it has drawn its last ugly breath. And this is an opportunity to do that.
Right on. Well, thank you so much. So what comes to mind when you think about all of the current events with the culmination of the murder of George Floyd and everything that has come in the aftermath of that, protests, most of them peaceful, as we know, although there has been some, rioting and looting that has occurred as well. And also, what the response from the president has been, things of that nature. Where are you sitting with all of that?
That's a lot.
Mhm.
My heart is broken watching a 21st century lynching for 8 minutes and 46 seconds while George Floyd died. And every cell in my being is impacted by that, is saddened by that, is angered by that. I am not surprised at all by the uprising. I'm not surprised by the uprising being labeled riots by certain factions and seen as what it actually is, which is an uprising in consciousness and the right to say, I matter as a Black person, when our country consistently, our culture consistently says, no, you don't matter. I'm actually more surprised that there hasn't been more violence than there has been in the uprising, because the depth of trauma that gets activated every time one of these incidents happen, every time a Black body is murdered, every time the breath is stolen from a Black human being, the whole culture is traumatized. And it's not just this event. This is 400 plus years of trauma. And I'm always stunned at how convenient our memory is as a nation, because this nation was founded in violence. It was an act of violence to land on the shores of a country that was already inhabited by people and overtake them with violence to steal their land. It was a violent activity that captured Black bodies and violently shipped them to America to be violently turned into economic widgets to build a country. So for us to have any objection to any level of violence that is happening, for me, is a double standard. And let me be clear, I'm not condoning violence. I'm understanding its nature and what is propelling it. And I also know that a lot of the violence that has been ignited in the uprising has been ignited by white-skinned people that have infiltrated what would have been a very peaceful uprising. And so, we quickly forget Tulsa, Oklahoma, where thousands of white people literally invaded an affluent Black community and burned it to the ground. But we forget that. The anniversary of that was just May 31st. And so, we have this double standard, and it's totally based in white supremacy, and it's totally based in racism, which is a self-fulfilling system of keeping itself in check through threat, and that's what I've seen out of the White House, is just another activation of one-upping to suppress, to put the Black society, the Black culture back in its place by escalating a threat above what their pain is expressing to put them in their place. It's it hurts my heart. And you know, we collectively continue to participate by continuing to elect leaders that lead from any form of supremacy. And that's not an indictment, it's just a fact.
Thank you so much, brother. Well said. Okay, so Rafe, um, in light of what we've seen recently as the protests continue and the uprising, as you say, I really like that. As the uprising continues, excuse me, um, we've seen that there have been in various locations police departments, different police departments taking part in the uprising and the protests with protesters. And with you being a former police officer, what's your take on that?
I think we have to look at each of those individually. Um, and I don't remember the exact location, but I remember how it rolled out. You know, the chief of police took off his riot gear. He laid down his weapon. He engaged the crowd in a conversation from the standpoint of listening, not talking, but listening. And then, he said, "What do you need from me?" And their response was, "March with us." And he did. That's a very different activity, because that is an activity where he opened himself to those individuals and he asked, "What is my role here?" He was invited to participate. The one I've seen most prevalent that has very little, if any, meaning to me, other than tokenism, is officers who are kneeling with protesters. I'm not saying it's not well intentioned. I'm not saying it's meaningless. I'm saying I have no earthly idea what the meaning is behind it. It doesn't give me any information. It doesn't articulate, what are you really kneeling for? Are you kneeling to show solidarity? Are you kneeling to take the heat off of you because you're in a uniform? See, it could be a lot of different things. And what's the long-term outcome here? And I think what we have to realize is that intention does not equal impact. And what we really need right now is impact. I know, as a former law enforcement officer, as a deputy, that, there is a code of silence. And so much of what we are trained to do, we are also trained to use officer discretion. And yet, nowhere in my training, and I know there's some now, but I don't think there's enough, and I don't think it's ongoing and consistent, is understanding that my discretion as an officer is no different than my discretion as a human being, and it is driven by unconscious, implicit bias that was handed to me by generations of thought processes. Everybody breathing has biases. It's just part of the mechanism of being a human being. And biases for white people is intentionally hidden. If if the system was transparent, very few of us would have ever bought into it. But it comes in coded language. The good schools, the wrong side of the track, the right side of the track, the affluent neighborhoods, the good neighborhoods, all of that is coding of white supremacy. Whether it's intentional or not, I don't really care at this point. What I care about is that we recognize how it's operating. There's a great resource, Jane Elliott, Unpacking the Racial Knapsack, and she lays it out so clearly and so perfectly in everyday language that I think people get it, because it is encoded in our um, raising as children, and it's passed on generation to generation because it's normalized society. And so, my question to any law enforcement organization at this point is, what are you actually doing internally to address the reality that law enforcement came out of slave chasers? That is the foundational organization of law enforcement, is slave chasers. And so that is embedded in the bias of police departments, of the whole institution of law enforcement. It's embedded in there. And are we willing to have the courage to teach that in our training programs, to teach implicit bias, and to create avenues where every officer has the support and the encouragement to continuously examine the biases that come up in every day in their job? Where are we making it safe? And this gets emotional for me because I watch that video and I see that officer who's actually not on George Floyd's body, standing there, walking back and forth in this tiny little space with his hands in his pockets. Where do we make it safe for that man in the course of 8 minutes and 46 seconds to act on behalf of George Floyd, yank that other officer off his neck, even when paramedics are asking to have access to him to check his well-being and are denied that? Where do we make space for it to be safe for an officer who does want to act in integrity to do so without being punished culturally? That's what we have to create. That's the conversation I want to have. Not that all officers are bad, because they're not. I wasn't a bad officer, and if I'm being brutally honest, there were times I looked away when I should have said something. And why didn't I say something? Because it was inculcated in me that if you speak up and you call for backup, nobody's coming. Now, that may never be spoken that directly, but in many departments, if not most, it's in the underlying current of the culture. And we have got to get honest. We've got to ferret that out. And more than that, we've got to put solutions in place that make it not only safe, but honorable to step up and hold our fellow officers accountable when they are out of line.
Beautifully stated. Thank you so much, Ray, for being willing to talk with that within our conversation, and just amazing insight. Thank you so much. All right, so why does this issue of racism matter so much to you personally?
Because of how I was raised. I've shared this personally with folks. I didn't understand what it meant to be white because I wasn't raised in white culture. I was embraced in my black family in the hood, and that, people that don't live there, and I use the word hood because that's what it was. It wasn't a black neighborhood. It was a ghetto. It was the hood. Mm-hmm. And so, that's not a disparaging term to those of us that live there.
Right.
It was the greatest embrace of love and family that I have ever known. I have never found the depth of acceptance and celebration for exactly who I am in my own white culture that I found in my Black culture growing up. And on a very personal level, as I said, initially, I'm married to a Black woman. This is very personal to me. When I look at my friends, the majority of them are Black and brown skinned people because that's who I relate to because of how I was raised. And as a minister, as a spiritual being, I understand that we're not separate, that, we belong to each other, that everything that happens to anyone happens to me because that's the truth of oneness. And so it matters deeply to me beyond tolerance, beyond acceptance. I'm not stopping until every expression of creation, every human being is celebrated.
Amen to that. All right, now you get to put on your doctor's hat, Dr. Rafe. If you were in a position to diagnose this problem of racism, what would your diagnosis be?
That it's a cancer of consciousness. And when I use the word consciousness, I literally mean of our mind, and that it eats away at the truth. We've the whole concept of racism is completely made up. We made it up, and the benefit to that is what we can make up, we can change, because it's not a reality. Weather is a reality. The seasons are a reality. Those things are set by natural law. Race is not a reality of natural law. It is made up. It is a cancer of our mental processes. It becomes a cancer of our heart.
Mm.
And it kills us because it kills our heart and it turns love into hate. And it literally is killing humanity.
Beautifully stated. Thank you so much. Now, you alluded to white supremacy a little earlier. If we could just kind of go back to that for a second. What does the concept of white supremacy mean to you? And how do you see that you've benefited from it? And how do you see that you've been harmed by it?
Whew. Well, white supremacy quite literally positions whiteness as superior to everything else. That is the construct of separation that creates race. It is that place, any place where we establish a line that says this is the supreme line, and everything else. See, there can't be anything above it, so everything else must be below it. And there's a ceiling that if you're not that, you can never achieve this level of greatness, of recognition, of celebration. It's that place, where it shows up is especially for mixed race people, that one drop rule. Why is it that we had, in rhetoric, not in fact, but in rhetoric, our first Black president when President Barack Obama was elected? Because we didn't have the first Black president. What we had was the first mixed race president. But white supremacy says if you have one drop of anything other than whiteness, you're that other drop. And it's about supremacy. It's about superiority. It gives us permission to dehumanize anyone who's not that. Racism is an economic structure because we dehumanize Black and brown bodies and relegate them to economic widgets to build for white culture what white culture doesn't want to put the blood, sweat, and tears into to build for themselves. And if that offends somebody, oh well, I'm not sorry. I started to say I'm sorry, but I'm not. because it's the truth. How have I benefited from white privilege? How have I not? You know, I can go to the grocery store and shop without being followed. I can drive anywhere I want, and nobody pulls me over for driving while white. I can walk down the street in the middle of the night and rarely be profiled or questioned about where I'm going. I mean, there's so many ways. Um, Probably the most clear way that I know to describe privilege, and I know I'm going back and forth between privilege and supremacy, but they're inseparably connected,
Yeah.
is from the perspective of being a female to male transgender person. Because for 43 years, I was the recipient of misogyny, of that oppressive system. And then 6 months into testosterone, as my physical appearance began to change, all of a sudden I was met with a different level of respect because I look like this. All of a sudden I had a different pay scale. All of a sudden I had all kinds of privileges that 6 months earlier I didn't have. Privilege, supremacy are not accusations. They're facts. They're just facts. And if we can stop defending them as if we're being accused of something and understand that it's a system we were born into, that doesn't make us helpless to change it. It means we didn't create it. But every time we participate in it silently, we support it, we feed it, we nurture it, we grow it. And so we have a responsibility, if we really want it to change, to speak up, to use our voice for the people that no longer have a voice.
Well stated. Thank you, brother. Thank you so much. And you know, I was gonna go into the white privilege thing, but you really tied those together very well. So thank you for that. I really appreciate that. All right. So here's a bit of an imaginal piece. Um, so in thinking about what Black and brown skinned people mean to you personally, thinking of your relationships with Black folks and what you love about us and what you know of the struggles we have faced as a culture in America, uh, taking all that into consideration. Imagine that you're sharing these thoughts with a group of white people, and finish this sentence. If only you knew.
If only you knew how much strength, how much grace, how much love lives in every Black human being, you would be astounded. Because, see, if you knew that, you would recognize that that is what's operating as each and every one of them. If you knew how deeply they already love all of humanity, that what is hated is not humanity, is not white people, but it's behavior that is hated. And it's not even so much the behavior that is hated as it is the pain that the behavior inflicts on every Black person. If you knew how deeply and how accurately they knew our white history more than we do, because they have to in order to survive in a white culture, you would be blown away. Because if you knew that, you would understand that they, in order just to continue to breathe and navigate American society, they have to know both sides. And they do. And they know it far better than we know our own history, far better than we know our own culture. And if we knew that, then we would recognize and know that they're already joined with us and that the only thing stopping them is whiteness and how it continues to operate as racism to keep them separate. If you really knew how much love, how much joy, how much talent, and how much just insane brilliance lives in a black body, you would start unraveling racism and supremacy as fast as you could.
Beautiful. All right, we're coming to the end of our interview, everyone, and I have this one last question for you, Brother Rafe. If you were to write a letter to George Floyd, what would that letter say?
I am so sorry. You deserved better. In my humanness, I wish I had been there because I know I would have done something, even if it resulted in me dying with you. You wouldn't have died alone. And that doesn't make me better than anybody that participated. It just makes me different. That I see you and that you have changed me by your life and by your death. And I will never let your death be in vain, brother. I am so sorry. And just know that while you no longer have breath, I do. And so I breathe for you now. And I will use my breath to honor you, to celebrate you, and to do everything I can to right this wrong. I love you.
Thank you so much, Rafe. I appreciate your heart. I appreciate your mind. I appreciate your knowledge. I appreciate your willingness to do this with us. And I feel you with me. I do. I feel you with us. So thank you, everyone out there who's been watching this series, The Love Heart Project. My name is Jamal Walker, and it's been a joy and a privilege to bring this interview to you. And there'll be many more to come as we'll keep this going and in all of its forms and as it morphs into whatever it's supposed to be. The Spirit led me to do this, and I'm going to let the Spirit keep moving. And thank you, Brother Rafe. Rafe Ellis, everybody, thank you so much. And
You're welcome.
until we see you all next time, everyone, have a blessed day.